Published 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, the 27th of February 2019. Updated 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, the 27th of February 2019. Civilians evacuated from the last jihadist holdout in Syria say Islamic State group fighters still trapped inside are divided, with some wanting to flee and other to fight to the end. Some want to fight till the end and others want to flee. A split is emerging among jihadists as starvation grips their imploding caliphate in eastern Syria. Thousands of men, women and children, including hundreds of jihadists, are believed to be trapped in the Islamic State group's last patch of territory in the village of Baghouz near the Iraqi border. The hundreds evacuated from the riverside hamlet on Tuesday are gathered at a screening point run by the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces 20 kilometers, 12 miles, north of the village. Ahmad al-Jora, a 32-year-old man from central Homs province, is among the small handful of men that are allowed to speak to journalists at the outpost. He claims he never fought with jihadists but says that they were living among us, in a makeshift camp in Baghouz smaller than a half a square kilometer. The remaining territory is so small that they are forced to live with us, he says, his face covered with a scarf. The imploding Islamic State group caliphate in eastern Syria has become a death trap of disease and starvation according to those who have fled. He says conditions inside the redoubt are dire, food and drinking water are scarce. Holed up in a death trap of disease and starvation, the remaining jihadists are now torn between fighting, fleeing and surrendering to US-backed forces. Some want to fight, some don't want to fight, and some want to escape, Jora says. But they don't have what it takes to put up a fight because there is no food, he says. Weapons need strength to be carried. Guns, bombs and explosive belts, staggered rows of rudimentary tarpaulin tents and a small cluster of buildings are all that remain of IS's once sprawling caliphate declared in 2014 across large swaths of Syria and neighboring Iraq. Holdout jihadists roam the settlement arms in hand. The fighters are everywhere, says Norgrush, a 20-year-old Syrian woman from the northeastern province of Hasakeh. They walk in the streets with their guns, bombs and explosive belts, she says. Tens of thousands of people have streamed out of the last patch of his territory in Syria, but some say a large number of Syrians and Iraqi jihadists remain in the Baghouz pocket as well as foreign fighters. A large number of Syrians and Iraqis remain in the Baghouz pocket, but also a significant number of foreigners, says the Syrian woman. Some were not affected by the siege, while others have died because of it, she says. Some IS supporters and foreigners have a steady supply of money and resources and they can buy whatever they want, she says. Syrians, however, have nothing, she claims. Her sister-in-law sits nearby. Aisha Abdulazim leaves her daughter to wail as she speaks with intent. There are so many families still inside that we had to use blankets as tents, she says. We lack a lot of necessities, says the woman in her 30s. Only those who have money can buy them, but as for us, one day we eat and one day we don't. We were convinced around 50,000 people, mostly women and children, have streamed out of the area since early December, according to the Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. The SDF have carried out 4 rounds of evacuations since last week, trucking thousands of women, men and children out of the ever-shrinking IS enclave. A fighter with the US-backed and Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces (SDF) stands guard as people queue at a scanning area for people evacuated from the last IS holdout in eastern Syria on the lookout for suspected jihadists. The Kurdish-led force says it wants to pluck all remaining civilians out before launching a final military push. The SDF evacuated around 30 truckloads of people from Baghouz on Tuesday. A few days earlier, the Hizbut Islamic Police told those trapped inside that they could leave if they wanted to, especially families and the wounded, women who quit the redoubt, tell AFP. According to previous accounts from evacuees, the IS leadership has called on women and children to flee the caliphate. Ismayan, an Iraqi woman, says the decision to leave was not an easy one. Yes, there was hunger inside, but we were convinced with what we were doing, the mother of 3 tells AFP. Isra, a 37-year-old Iraqi woman from Baghdad, says she was also reluctant to leave. When asked why she left, she says she did so when jihadists called on those inside to head to a nearby hilltop, from which the SDF had opened a humanitarian corridor. Pointing to her nephew, she says, "There was no milk and he is very ill because of hunger. The doctor prescribed him cow milk, but there are no cows in Baghouse." Sorry, we are not currently accepting comments on this article.